Let's move on to our next speaker, Helen Christensen. Scientia Professor of Mental Health, Helen Christensen, is Chief Scientist and Director of the Black Dog Institute. Helen is recognised as the pioneer of the use of digital technologies to deliver therapies for mental illness. Talking of stemming the rising tide of mental illness, please welcome Helen Christensen. Look at her.
Hello, everyone. When I was in my early 20s, I came back from overseas, as you do, and decided I'd take up parachuting. So I began parachuting at a school down in Sussex Street here in Sydney. It was about a week's training, and then you got onto these very small, tiny little planes and held on to the wing of the plane and let go. And you had a static line, it was called, which was the parachute was attached to the aeroplane. So it released your parachute and you safely landed. Now I moved on to what's called dummy ripcord pulls, which is where you have a fake ripcord and you have it in here. You jump out of the plane like this and it's got a bit of ribbon attached to it, and the instructor, as the plane's receding away, says, "Oh yes, she was together. She actually managed to pull her dummy ripcord." So I moved on and I was feeling very confident. I was going to a reputable parachute school, so I felt quite safe. And then one day I realised that something actually had to happen for me to safely land. Some intervention was required, otherwise I would not be on the ground safely. And all of a sudden, I felt incredibly unsafe. Now, I want to use this story as a metaphor for what is happening to our youth with depression. So as our young people go into adolescence, around 14%, or 560,000 young people right now, will experience an anxiety, a depression, or a psychosis. That will roll out without interruption, as it has for the last 20, 30, 50 years, unless we intervene. So some intervention is required in order for this not to occur. And unless we do that intervention, we will find ourselves in the same position. We have to give our kids parachutes. We have to give them static lines so that they'll be safely through this period. So what I want to do in making this argument is say 4 things. First of all, I want to say why depression is important to prevent. I want to say what the evidence is about how we can actually prevent depression. I thirdly want to say if we do have these fantastic depression programs that prevent kids from getting depressed, why aren't we using them? And finally, I want to argue that every hurdle can be overcome by using technology in our schools. So first of all, why is depression important? It's important because 560,000 people, as I mentioned before, young people, will develop a depressive type illness as they go through adolescence. That's 1 in 14 kids. And if you think about it even more closely, that's 5 kids in each classroom who are not paying attention, who are having their education compromised. It's been estimated that one person with depression will lose 20 days of school in their final year of school. That makes a difference. The other factor is cost. $34,000 each year for somebody who has depression across our society, and it's continual and it's cumulative. So a kid with depression is likely to be a young adult with depression, it's likely to be an older adult with depression, and that will add up to around about $1.3 million per person. And that is just the financial cost. So can we do anything? What are there in terms of prevention programs? It would be all doom and gloom, as we say, if there wasn't some silver lining here. And there is a silver lining, and that is that cognitive behaviour therapy, which is a talking therapy, can avert depression in around about 11% of kids who are vulnerable. Now, cognitive behaviour therapy is really a very brief therapy that teaches people that because you actually think something, that you have privileged access to those particular thoughts, they must be real. And CBT tells you that they can be biased, and it makes an awful lot of difference. So my colleagues and I have found, as I said, we reviewed all the literature and found that about 11% of kids can be averted from having this depression. Well, let me give you another example of this. In Sydney, last year, we went into 10 schools. 5 of the schools got a program called Sparks, which is an online fantasy game, which teaches CBT, and the other 5 schools didn't get anything. They got a control condition. We asked the question, for the higher school certificate, can we immunise or inoculate our children so they don't get depressed as they're going to their final year exams? And the answer was yes. We got a significantly lower anxiety and depression in those kids who did that. And also there was an increase in their ATAR score when their exam results were looked at. So here we go. We can avert depression in a large number of kids, and it will make a difference to them. So having said that, why is it that we don't actually do these programs if they are effective? And I think there are a number of reasons. A couple are, for example, that schools are for reading, writing and arithmetic. Also, I think people don't actually believe that we can make a difference and that depression works. But I think there are really 3 major problems. The first is that people think, or we all think, less validly about evidence-based programs than non-evidence-based programs. So educators, politicians, governments really think all the flowers should be allowed to bloom and that scientifically proved programs are no good or better than others that aren't scientifically chosen. The second is that people think that mental health problems are different from physical problems, and that if you had a vaccine or a pill or something like that and gave it to people, then everyone would be quite willing to take that in order to prevent depression. Now, I think there's a real double standard here, and I'd like to give an example of that. As I said before, about 11% of depression can be averted in people who are vulnerable. That's 1 in 9. 1 in 9 kids. Let's think about cardiovascular disease and take statins. If you look at the preventative effect of statins, it's 1 in 50. 50 people have to take a statin in order to avoid a cardiovascular incident. If you look at baby aspirin, 1 in 1,667 people have to take a particular baby aspirin in order for one person to avoid a cardiovascular incident. That's a big difference. So 1 in 9 versus 1 in 50 versus 1 in 1,667. We are only too willing to take statins and aspirins, but not provide CBT to our children. And if you look at the percentage of people who take statins and baby aspirin, around 50% of the US population takes baby aspirin, and about 50% of those over 65 years of age do as well. So the third reason that is often said we shouldn't be doing these programs is that it's too hard. It's too hard to disrupt the classroom. It's very difficult to do that. I would say to you that the program that we used for trying to prevent depression in young people was an online, automated CBT program. It was a game through a smartphone and the internet. It didn't require a therapist, didn't even require a teacher to be able to help. So I guess what my final conclusion here is that smartphone technology can deliver these programs to young people. 98% of teenagers have a CBT, a depression. Let's put parachutes and static lines on our kids and help prevent the number of them who will develop depression in their teenage years. Thank you.